My son's scream cut through the air like a knife. 1 second, Ethan was standing beside me in my sister's kitchen. The next, scalding coffee was pouring down his chest, and he was on the floor convulsing. I tore his steaming shirt off with shaking hands. His skin was blistering, bubbling, peeling away with the fabric. The smell of burning flesh. My 8-year-old begging me to make it stop. Brenda stood there, holding the empty mug. Satisfaction in her eyes. My mother sat at the table sipping her coffee, watching her grandson writhe in pain like she was watching TV. Neither moved to help. Neither called 911. They just watched. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't an accident. This was deliberate. And I was in a room with 2 people who had just burned my child and felt nothing. But before I tell you what happened next, before I tell you how I finally broke free from the people who were supposed to love me, I need you to do something for me. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever felt trapped by toxic family members who demanded everything while giving nothing, please hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel and leave a comment below sharing your own experience. Your story matters, and together we can remind each other that we're not alone. Now, let me take you back to the beginning, to show you how I ended up in that kitchen, watching my sister deliberately hurt my child. I was 19 when I got pregnant with Ethan. His father, a guy I had dated for 6 months and thought I knew, disappeared. The moment I showed him the positive pregnancy test, one day he was there, talking about our future, and the next his phone was disconnected. His apartment cleared out, and I was alone staring at 2 pink lines that would change everything. I sat on the bathroom floor of my childhood home for 3 hours before I could gather the courage to tell my mother. Carol's reaction wasn't the support I desperately needed. She didn't hug me or tell me everything would be okay. Instead, she looked at me with this expression of profound disappointment, mixed with something else. Something that looked almost like satisfaction. As if my failure confirmed everything she had always believed about me, she sat down at the kitchen table, folded her hands, and delivered her verdict. I could stay in her house, but there would be conditions. So many conditions. I would pay rent. Even though I was still in community college and working part-time at a grocery store, I would do all the housework because she wasn't going to clean up after me and a baby. I would be responsible for all of Ethan's expenses because this was my choice, my consequence. And most importantly, I would be grateful. Endlessly. Effusively grateful for her generosity in not throwing me out on the street like I deserved. From the moment Ethan was born, I was trapped in a cage of obligation and guilt. Carol made sure I knew that every diaper, every late-night crying session, every moment of my motherhood was an inconvenience she was tolerating out of the goodness of her heart. She never held Ethan unless someone was watching. I never offered to babysit so I could study or sleep. But she had no problem criticizing every single parenting decision I made. I was breastfeeding wrong. I was holding him too much and making him dependent. I wasn't stimulating him enough developmentally. I dressed him in clothes that were too casual. I let him cry too long, or I picked him up too quickly. Nothing I did was right, and every mistake was evidence that I was failing as a mother, just as she had predicted. Meanwhile, my sister Brenda was living her best life. She was 5 years older than me, had married her college boyfriend Derek, and they lived in a beautiful house in a good neighborhood. Derek worked in finance, making enough money that Brenda could be a stay-at-home wife, decorating her house and posting perfect pictures on social media. When she announced her pregnancy a year after Ethan was born, Carol practically threw a parade. The difference in how our pregnancies were treated was stark and painful. When I was pregnant, Carol complained about every doctor's appointment I needed her to drive me to, every bout of morning sickness that made me late for my chores. When Brenda was pregnant, Carol threw her a lavish baby shower with 100 guests, bought her an expensive stroller and crib set, and spent hours shopping for tiny designer outfits. Kevin's arrival was treated like the second coming. Carol took 2 weeks off work to stay at Brenda's house and help with the baby. She cooked meals, did laundry, held Kevin for hours while Brenda napped. She never once mentioned that Brenda should be grateful or that she was inconveniencing anyone. This was what grandmothers did for their daughters. Apparently. Just not for all their daughters. I tried not to be jealous. I told myself that Brenda's situation was different, that she was married and stable, while I was a struggling single mother. But the jealousy ate at me anyway, especially when I watched Carol coo over Kevin while barely acknowledging Ethan's existence in the same room. My son, her grandson, it was invisible to her, unless she needed something to criticize. By the time Ethan was 2, I had dropped out of college. I couldn't afford tuition, childcare, and Carol's rent while working part-time. I got a full-time job as a receptionist at a dental office, which meant putting Ethan in the cheapest daycare I could find. The place was understaffed and chaotic, and I cried every day when I dropped him off. But I had no choice. Carol made it clear that she wouldn't watch him. She was too busy helping Brenda with Kevin, who was apparently a much more demanding baby than Ethan had ever been. The pattern continued for years. Every milestone Kevin reached was celebrated with elaborate parties and expensive gifts. His first steps, his first words, his first day of preschool, all documented and praised endlessly. Ethan's milestones were acknowledged with a nod if I was lucky, more often ignored completely. When Ethan started reading at 4 years old, sounding out words in his picture books with determined concentration, Carol's only comment was that some children developed academic skills early as a compensation for lacking social skills. I started to notice that Brenda actively discouraged any interaction between the cousins. She never invited us to Kevin's birthday parties, claiming they were small family affairs. Even though I knew from Facebook that half the neighborhood attended, when I suggested playdates, she always had an excuse. Kevin was sick, or they had other plans, or the timing wasn't good. The few times the boys did interact, usually at Carol's house during holidays, Brenda watched Ethan like a hawk, ready to blame him for any conflict. The worst part was that Ethan adored Kevin. He didn't understand the dynamics. I didn't see the favoritism or the calculated exclusion. He just saw a cousin, a potential friend, and he wanted Kevin to like him. He would bring his favorite toys to share, would offer to let Kevin play with them first, would try so hard to be included. And Kevin, absorbing his mother's attitude, treated Ethan with casual dismissal that broke my heart every time I witnessed it. When Ethan was 5, I finally saved enough money to move out of Carol's house. The apartment I found was tiny, a 1-bedroom in an old building where the heat was unreliable and the neighbors were loud. I gave Ethan the bedroom and made a sleeping area for myself in the living room with a fold-out couch. It wasn't much, but it was ours, and for the first time in years I felt like I could breathe. The freedom was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. I no longer had to account for every minute of my day. No longer had to endure Carol's constant criticism. No longer had to watch my son be treated as less than, but I also no longer had any safety net. If I got sick and couldn't work, we had no backup. If Ethan needed something expensive, there was no one to help. We were completely on our own. And the weight of that responsibility crushed me some nights after Ethan was asleep and I tallied up bills with money I didn't have. I took a second job waiting tables 3 nights a week at a diner near our apartment. I worked the late shift, from 6 until 2 in the morning, which meant finding a neighbor willing to listen for Ethan while he slept. Mrs. Chen from across the hall was a widow in her 70s who seemed to appreciate having a purpose. I paid her what I could, and she watched over my sleeping son like he was her own grandchild, checking on him every hour and calling me immediately if he so much as coughed. My days became a blur of exhaustion. Wake up at 6. Get Ethan ready for school. Drop him off. Work at the dental office until 5. Race home to spend an hour with him. Leave for the diner. Work until 2. Stumble home. Collapse into bed. And start over. I was tired down to my bones. Tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. But every time I wanted to give up, I looked at Ethan and found the strength to keep going. Despite everything, Ethan thrived in ways that continually amazed me. He was naturally curious, asking questions about everything, devouring library books, faster than I could check them out. His teachers raved about him, using words like exceptional and gifted. He won every spelling bee, every math competition, brought home perfect report cards and artwork that they displayed in the school hallways. He was extraordinary, and I was so proud of him, it physically hurt sometimes. But his success created a new problem. The better Ethan did, the more hostile Brenda became. Kevin was an average student, pleasant but unremarkable, and that was apparently unacceptable to Brenda. She hired tutors, enrolled him in enrichment programs, hovered over his homework with an intensity that bordered on obsessive, and still, Kevin remained solidly average. Not struggling, not failing, just ordinary. For Brenda, ordinary was not enough. The comparisons started subtly, comments about how different children had different strengths, how some children peaked early academically, while others were late bloomers. But the comparisons grew more pointed as the years passed. At family dinners, Brenda would mention Kevin's sports achievements and his popularity at school, her tone implying these were more valuable than any academic success. Carol would nod along, praising Kevin's well-rounded development while barely acknowledging Ethan's straight-A report card sitting on the table. I tried to shield Ethan from it. I tried to build him up at home so the rejection from his family wouldn't hurt so much. I told him he was special, that his intelligence was a gift, that I was proud of him. But I could see it affecting him anyway. He started getting quiet at family gatherings, withdrawing into himself. His shoulders hunched, like he was trying to take up less space. He asked me once why Grandma Carol didn't love him as much as she loved Kevin, and I had no answer that wouldn't either lie to him or break his heart further. When Ethan was 7, things escalated in a way I should have seen coming but somehow didn't. The school announced a district-wide academic competition for third graders, testing math, reading comprehension, and problem-solving skills. The top 3 winners would receive scholarships to a prestigious summer enrichment program. Ethan was excited, studying, without me even asking, practicing problems in a workbook. I bought him. Kevin was entered into the competition too, and Brenda went into overdrive. She hired a special tutor who specialized in academic competitions. She pulled Kevin out of soccer to focus on studying. She created practice tests and time drills. I heard through Carol, who couldn't resist mentioning it, that Brenda was spending thousands of dollars to give Kevin every advantage. I couldn't afford a tutor. I could barely afford the workbook. But Ethan didn't seem to need one. He approached the competition with the same quiet determination he brought to everything, spending his free time reading and solving puzzles for fun. He wasn't stressed about it. He just wanted to do his best. The day of the competition, I took the morning off work to be there. Carol and Brenda arrived together, both dressed like they were attending a wedding, flanking Kevin, who looked miserable and overwhelmed. Ethan sat with his classmates, looking small and young, in his thrift store button-down shirt, but his eyes were bright with excitement. I waved to him, and he gave me a huge smile that made every sacrifice worth it. The competition took 3 hours. Afterwards, we were told results would be posted in 2 weeks. I took Ethan out for ice cream with money I really couldn't spare, and we celebrated his effort regardless of the outcome. He told me he thought he did well, that some of the problems were tricky but fun. I hugged him tight and told him I was proud of him no matter what. Brenda, I heard later from another parent, had been pacing in the hallway the entire time, practically chewing her nails off with anxiety. When Kevin came out, she immediately peppered him with questions about every single problem, her voice growing shriller with each answer that didn't meet her expectations. They left without saying goodbye to anyone. 2 weeks later, the results arrived. Ethan placed first in the entire district. First place, beating out over 200 third graders, including many from wealthy schools with advanced programs. His scores were nearly perfect, high enough that the competition coordinator called me personally to congratulate me on my exceptional son. I cried on the phone with a stranger, overcome with pride and relief and vindication. My boy, my brilliant, beautiful boy, had proven what I always knew. He was special. Kevin placed 37th, solidly middle of the pack, a respectable showing that any reasonable parent would be proud of. But Brenda was not a reasonable parent. I got the first text while I was still processing Ethan's win. It was a wall of vitriol, accusing me of cheating, of somehow giving Ethan unfair advantages, of deliberately sabotaging Kevin. The messages came rapid fire, each more unhinged than the last. I didn't respond. I blocked her number and tried to focus on celebrating with Ethan. We made his favorite dinner, and I let him stay up late to pick out books he wanted to read at the summer program. He was so happy, talking a mile a minute about all the things he would learn. I didn't tell him about Brenda's messages. I didn't want to taint his joy with her poison. But the next day, Carol called. Her tone was cold, disappointed, like I was a child who had misbehaved. She said I needed to apologize to Brenda for making her feel bad, that I should have prepared her for Ethan's win so Kevin's placement wouldn't be such a blow, that I was being insensitive to how hard this was for Brenda and Kevin. She actually said that Ethan should consider withdrawing from the summer program so that Kevin, who hadn't even qualified as an alternate, I wouldn't feel bad about missing out. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She wanted my son to give up an incredible opportunity because Brenda's son hadn't earned it. She wanted me to apologize for my child being smart and working hard. She wanted Ethan to make himself smaller, dimmer, less than he was, to protect Kevin's feelings. And she said all of this like it was completely reasonable. Like I was the problematic one for even questioning it. For the first time in my life, I told my mother no. I told her Ethan had earned his spot fairly and would be attending the program. I told her that if Brenda had a problem with that, it was her problem to deal with. I told her I was tired of my son being treated like his accomplishments were an insult to their family. My hands shook as I spoke. My voice cracked. But I said it all. Carol's response was ice. She said I was being selfish and divisive, that I was tearing the family apart by refusing to consider everyone's feelings, that I was teaching Ethan to be arrogant and insensitive. She said if I insisted on this path, there would be consequences. Then she hung up on me. The consequences started immediately. I was uninvited from Carol's upcoming birthday dinner. Brenda posted vague messages on social media about family betrayal and people who couldn't be happy for others' success, clearly directed at me, even though she never mentioned names. Other family members, aunts and uncles and cousins I barely saw, started commenting on her posts with supportive messages, buying into her narrative without knowing the full story. I was suddenly the villain in a story I didn't recognize. According to the version Brenda and Carol were spreading, I was a jealous single mother who pushed Ethan too hard academically while looking down on Kevin for being a normal kid. They made it sound like I had somehow rigged the competition, like I was constantly bragging about Ethan's achievements while putting Kevin down. None of it was true. But truth didn't matter when Brenda was spinning the narrative. For 3 months, I was frozen out. No calls. No texts. No invitations to anything. Ethan noticed, asking why we weren't seeing Grandma Carol anymore, why Kevin didn't want to play with him. I made excuses, said everyone was busy, changed the subject. But inside I was grieving, not for the relationship I had lost. Because if I was honest, that relationship had been toxic and one-sided for years. But I grieved for the relationship I had always hoped we could have yielded. The family I had always wanted us to be. Ethan attended his summer program and loved every second of it. He came home every day buzzing with excitement about what he had learned, the friends he had made, the experiments they had done. He was so purely happy, untouched by the family drama swirling around him. And I was grateful for that at least. Whatever else happened, he had this experience, this joy, and no one could take it from him. Then, in early September, right before school started, Carol called. Her tone was cordial, almost pleasant, like the last 3 months of silence hadn't happened. She said Brenda wanted to make amends, that they both realized they had overreacted. That family was too important to let a misunderstanding tear them apart. She invited us to breakfast at Brenda's house that Saturday. Just the family. To clear the air and move forward. I should have said no. Every instinct I had screamed at me to refuse. To protect Ethan. To maintain the distance that had honestly been a relief. But I was so tired of fighting. Tired of being the bad guy. Tired of explaining to Ethan why his family didn't want him around. And a tiny, desperate part of me still hoped that maybe they had realized how wrong they had been. Maybe they wanted to genuinely apologize and rebuild on healthier terms. Maybe this time would be different. I told Carol we would come. I heard the satisfaction in her voice when she confirmed the details, and I ignored the warning bells that started ringing in my head. I wanted this to work. I wanted my family back. Even though deep down I knew the family I wanted had never really existed. That Saturday morning, I dressed Ethan in his nicest clothes and rehearsed with him about being polite and respectful. I told him that Aunt Brenda wanted to talk, that things might be a little awkward, but we would get through it together. He nodded seriously. My little man trying so hard to understand adult problems that no 8-year-old should have to deal with. I braided his hair neatly, made sure his shirt was tucked in, and tried to quiet the anxiety churning in my stomach. The drive to Brenda's house took 20 minutes through increasingly affluent neighborhoods. Her house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac. A 2-story colonial with a perfectly manicured lawn and expensive cars in the driveway. I had been there only a handful of times, always feeling out of place in my worn clothes and beat-up Honda. Today that feeling was magnified, my skin prickling with unease as we walked up to the front door. Brenda answered immediately, almost like she had been waiting by the door. She wore yoga pants and a designer shirt, her hair and makeup perfect, even though it was barely 8 in the morning. Her smile was tight, not reaching her eyes, and she didn't greet Ethan at all, just stepped back to let us in and gestured toward the kitchen where I could hear Carol's voice. The kitchen was magazine-worthy. All gleaming granite countertops and stainless steel appliances. Carol sat at the kitchen island with a cup of coffee, also dressed too nicely for a casual breakfast. Kevin was nowhere to be seen, which should have been my first clue. Brenda said he was upstairs playing video games, that this was a conversation for the adults. Her emphasis on adults while looking at Ethan made my jaw clench. Coffee was already brewed, the pot sitting on the counter still steaming. Brenda gestured to it, offering me a cup with exaggerated hospitality. I declined, my stomach too unsettled to handle caffeine. Ethan stood close to my side, his small hand finding mine, and I squeezed it reassuringly. We sat at the table, and I waited for someone to start this alleged clearing of the air. Instead, Brenda launched immediately into an attack. There was no preamble, no attempt at civility. She started accusing me of coaching Ethan to sabotage Kevin, and of deliberately turning my son into a show-off who made other children feel inferior. She said I had always been jealous of her marriage and her house and her perfect life, and that I was using Ethan as a weapon to hurt her family. I tried to interrupt, tried to defend us, but she talked over me. Her voice rose steadily, her face flushing red, and Carol just sat there nodding along like this was all perfectly reasonable. I looked at my mother, silently begging her to intervene, to see how crazy this was, but she just looked back at me with that same cold disappointment I had seen my entire life. Then Brenda turned on Ethan directly. She looked at my 8-year-old son and called him arrogant. She said he thought he was better than Kevin just because he was good at taking tests. She said he was a bad influence, that his presence made Kevin feel inadequate. She said that if I couldn't teach my son humility and respect for others' feelings, then maybe we shouldn't be part of this family anymore. Ethan's hand tightened in mine. I felt him trembling, saw tears starting to well in his eyes, and something snapped inside me. I stood up, pulling Ethan with me, ready to leave, ready to grab my son and walk out of this house and never look back. I should have done it months ago. Years ago. I should have protected him from these people who saw his light and wanted to extinguish it. But before I could take a step, Brenda moved. She grabbed the coffee pot from the counter, and I saw her face in that moment. Saw the calculation in her eyes, the deliberate intent, the hatred so pure it stole my breath. And then she was stepping forward, tilting the pot, and scalding coffee was pouring through the air in a dark arc straight toward my son. Time fractured into slow-motion horror, Ethan's mouth opening in a scream before the liquid even hit him, the coffee splashing across his chest, soaking into his shirt, his skin blistering instantly underneath. The sound he made. Oh God. The sound, like an animal caught in a trap. His small body crumpling, hands scrabbling at his burning chest, and me lunging for him. My own screams mixing with his. My hands moved without conscious thought, grabbing his shirt and ripping it over his head. The fabric was soaked, steaming, and underneath his skin was already bubbling, angry red welts spreading across his chest and shoulder. The smell of burnt flesh mixed with coffee made bile rise in my throat. Ethan was convulsing with pain, his screams turning to gasps as he couldn't get enough air, and I was trying to remember first aid, trying to think past the red rage consuming me. I looked up at Brenda, and I don't think I was fully human in that moment. Something primal took over, some mama bear instinct that wanted to destroy the threat to my child. But she just stood there holding the empty pot, and I will never forget the expression on her face. She wasn't horrified, She wasn't apologetic. She looked satisfied. Like this was what she had wanted all along. To hurt my son badly enough that he would never threaten her precious Kevin again. Carol didn't move from her seat. She sat there sipping her coffee, watching her grandson writhe in agony, and her face was blank. Not shocked. Not concerned. Just blank. Like this was mildly inconvenient, but not really her problem. When I screamed at her to call an ambulance, to do something, anything, she actually sighed like I was being dramatic. Brenda spoke then, her voice calm and conversational like she was discussing the weather. She said accidents happen, that Ethan had startled her, and she had dropped the pot, that I was overreacting, that it was just coffee, that he would be fine. And Carol nodded, backing her up, telling me I was making a scene, that I should calm down and deal with this quietly. I looked at these two women, my sister and my mother, and I realized with perfect clarity that they were not just toxic. They were dangerous. They had conspired to hurt my child, possibly planned this entire encounter as a trap. And now they were gaslighting me about what I had just witnessed with my own eyes. They would hurt Ethan again if I gave them the chance. They would destroy him if it meant protecting their own egos. I scooped Ethan into my arms, his skin hot and slick against mine, his sobs muffled against my shoulder. I didn't say a word to them, didn't scream or cry or argue. I just carried my son out of that house, moving as fast as I could while trying not to jostle his injuries. Behind me, I heard Brenda call out something about me being unreasonable, about not knowing how to take a joke. But I didn't stop. I got Ethan into the car, buckled him in as gently as possible, and drove to the hospital with my hands shaking so hard I could barely hold the steering wheel. The emergency room was a blur of concerned faces and rapid questions. A nurse took Ethan back immediately, calling for a doctor, and I followed in a daze. They cut away what remained of his shirt, documenting his injuries with photographs and careful notes. Second-degree burns covering nearly 20% of his upper body. The doctor, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner, examined him thoroughly and then pulled me aside. She asked what happened. Not in an accusatory way, but in a way that made it clear she knew this wasn't an accident. Burns that extensive and that patterned didn't come from a child accidentally bumping into a hot pot. I told her everything, every detail of the morning, the setup, Brenda's deliberate actions, Carol's complicity. The doctor listened without interruption, her expression growing graver with every word. When I finished, she handed me a card. A family lawyer who specialized in abuse cases. She said quietly that I needed to protect my son, that what happened to him was assault, that I had options. She couldn't force me to take legal action, but she would be documenting everything in Ethan's medical records, and those records would be available if I chose to pursue charges. Then she squeezed my shoulder and went back to treating my son. They kept us for hours, cleaning and dressing the wounds, managing Ethan's pain, monitoring for shock. I sat beside his bed and watched him drift in and out of consciousness, his face pale and streaked with tears. And I made a decision. I had spent my entire adult life trying to earn love from people who were incapable of giving it. I had sacrificed and compromised and apologized for things that weren't my fault. I had taught my son to make himself smaller to accommodate their cruelty, and it had gotten him burned. Never again. I was done. Done hoping they would change. I've done trying to fix something that had always been broken. Done subjecting my child to abuse in the name of family. Brenda and Carol had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. They had shown me exactly who they were, and I was finally ready to believe them. We got home late that afternoon. Ethan medicated and exhausted, his chest wrapped in sterile bandages. I settled him on the couch with his favorite blanket and a movie. Then I picked up my phone. Methodically, without hesitation, I blocked every number. Brenda, Carol, every Flying Monkey family member who had sided with them over the past months. I deleted them from social media, removed every digital connection. I was cutting them out like the cancer they were. Then my phone started ringing from unknown numbers. I didn't answer. Voicemails piled up, and when I finally listened to them hours later, they were exactly what I expected. Brenda claiming it was an accident, that I was blowing things out of proportion, that I was going to regret destroying the family over a misunderstanding. Carol saying I was being cruel and vindictive, that I owed it to everyone to work this out privately, that involving authorities would only hurt everyone, including Ethan. Other family members I barely knew leaving messages about forgiveness and Christian charity and not being so proud. I deleted every message and saved the recordings. Evidence. I was building a case, piece by piece, because I knew this wasn't over. Brenda and Carol wouldn't let me go that easily. They would come for me, try to force reconciliation, or at least force silence. But I was done being silent. I was done protecting them from the consequences of their actions. The next morning, after a night where Ethan woke screaming from nightmares 3 times and I held him while we both cried, I called the lawyer. Patricia Chen's office was small, tucked above a convenience store in a less trendy part of town. But her reputation was excellent. She took my call immediately, listened to my story, and told me to come in that afternoon. Bring all the documentation, she said. Medical records, text messages, anything I had. And bring Ethan if he was up for it, because she would need to hear from him too. Ethan was not up for it. He was running a slight fever, the burns already showing signs of infection. Despite the antibiotics, he was traumatized, flinching every time someone reached for him, bursting into tears at unexpected moments. But he sat in Patricia's office, holding my hand so tight his knuckles went white, and he answered her gentle questions with surprising clarity. Yes, Aunt Brenda had thrown the coffee at him on purpose. Yes, he had seen her face right before she did it, and she looked angry. Yes, Grandma Carol had been there and hadn't helped. Yes, he was scared of them. Patricia's expression grew harder with every answer. When she finished interviewing Ethan, she sent him to play in the waiting room with toys she kept for child clients. And then she looked at me with absolute seriousness. What happened to my son was criminal assault. We could press charges, and she strongly recommended we did. But the criminal process was slow and uncertain, and in the meantime we needed immediate protection. She wanted to file for an emergency restraining order, and then pursue a civil case for damages. The thought of going to court terrified me. I would have to face them, expose our family's dysfunction to strangers, risk judgment and backlash. But then I thought about Ethan's screams, the smell of his burning skin, the satisfied look on Brenda's face. I thought about what she might do next time if I didn't stop her now. So I told Patricia to do whatever she needed to do. Protect my son. Make them pay. Whatever it took. The restraining order hearing was scheduled for 3 days later. In those 3 days, I took off work using what little sick time I had left. I couldn't leave Ethan with a sitter. Couldn't bear to let him out of my sight. We stayed home, and I changed his bandages multiple times a day, watching for signs of infection, giving him pain medication on schedule. He was withdrawn, having nightmares, asking me questions. I didn't know how to answer about why Aunt Brenda hated him so much. Meanwhile, Brenda and Carol ramped up their campaign. Unable to contact me directly, they started calling my workplace. They told my boss I was having a mental health crisis, that I was an unfit mother, that I was keeping Ethan from his family against his will. My boss, thankfully, had known me for years and didn't believe them, but he pulled me aside to warn me that they were trying to get me fired. I showed him the medical records and explained the situation, and he immediately offered to provide a statement if needed. They also started contacting Ethan's school. They called the principal claiming I was homeschooling Ethan without proper authorization, that I was isolating him, that they were concerned for his welfare. The principal called me confused, and I had to explain the entire situation to him too, providing documentation of Ethan's injuries and the upcoming court date. He assured me the school would not release any information about Ethan to anyone but me, and he made notes in Ethan's file about the situation. The day of the restraining order hearing arrived. I dressed in my only suit, a cheap black number from Target that I had bought for job interviews years ago. Patricia had warned me that Brenda would likely show up with an expensive lawyer and try to make me look like the aggressor. She wasn't wrong. Brenda arrived at the courthouse in a designer dress. Her lawyer, a slick-looking man in a $1,000 suit, who immediately started trying to intimidate Patricia with legal jargon and threats. But Patricia was unfazed. She had seen it all before, and she was ready. The hearing was in front of a judge who specialized in family law, a stern-looking woman in her 60s, who motioned us all to approach. Brenda's lawyer immediately launched into a speech about misunderstandings and family disagreements that were being blown out of proportion by an unstable single mother. He painted me as jealous and vindictive, using my own child as a weapon against my successful sister. Then Patricia presented the evidence. Medical records with photographs showing the extent and pattern of Ethan's burns, the emergency room doctor's notes explicitly stating the injuries were not consistent with an accidental spill. Ethan's own testimony, recorded with his permission and age-appropriate protections. Text messages from Brenda showing months of hostility and threats. Voicemails from Carol admitting she had been present but done nothing to help. Statements from my boss and Ethan's school about the harassment campaigns. The judge's expression grew colder with every piece of evidence. When Brenda's lawyer tried to argue that his client had slipped and accidentally spilled the coffee, the judge cut him off. She said the medical evidence alone was damning. But combined with the documented history of abuse and the witness testimony, this was clearly a deliberate assault on a minor. The emergency restraining order was granted immediately. 500 feet minimum distance. No contact, direct or indirect. Violation would result in immediate arrest. Brenda's face went red, then white, then red again. She started to protest, actually opened her mouth to argue with the judge, and her lawyer had to physically restrain her and whisper urgently in her ear. Carol, sitting beside her, looked stunned, like she couldn't believe this was actually happening. They had expected to walk in, intimidate me into backing down, and walk out vindicated. Instead, they were being legally barred from contact and facing the very real possibility of criminal charges. As we left the courthouse, Patricia told me this was just the beginning. The restraining order protected us, but it didn't address the larger issues or hold them accountable in a meaningful way. She wanted to file a civil suit for assault, battery, emocional distress, and medical expenses. She wanted to make sure they understood there were real consequences for what they had done, and if I was willing, she wanted to push for criminal charges as well. I was willing. I was more than willing. I wanted them to face every possible consequence, but I was also terrified of what it would mean for Ethan, making him relive the trauma in court, exposing him to more of their poison. Patricia assured me she would do everything possible to minimize his involvement, to protect him throughout the process. But ultimately, it was my decision. I looked at my son, his chest still bandaged, his eyes haunted, and I thought about what kind of example I wanted to set. Did I want him to learn that people could hurt you without consequences, that family got a free pass for abuse, or did I want him to learn that his pain mattered, that standing up for yourself was worth the cost, that justice existed even when it was hard to reach? The answer was obvious. We were seeing this through to the end. The civil trial was set for 6 months out. In the meantime, life slowly returned to a new normal. Ethan's physical wounds healed, though the scars remained, pink and puckered across his chest, a permanent reminder of what his family had done to him. His psychological wounds took longer. He had nightmares for months. Started therapy with a child psychologist who specialized in trauma. He developed anxiety around hot liquids, around conflict, around meeting new people. The damage ran deep, and I hated Brenda and Carol more for that than for anything else. They had stolen my son's sense of safety in the world. But slowly, Ethan began to heal in other ways too. Without the constant stress of family drama, without having to watch his every word and action to avoid setting off Brenda's jealousy, he began to relax. His natural personality emerged more fully, a combination of gentle kindness and fierce intelligence that made his teachers adore him. He made real friends at school, kids who appreciated him for who he was. He discovered a passion for painting, spending hours creating vibrant canvases that his therapist said were part of his healing process. Meanwhile, the legal machine ground forward. Patricia filed the civil suit, and Brenda and Carol were forced to respond. They hired that same expensive lawyer, and the legal fees started piling up. Discovery was brutal, both sides requesting documents and depositions. I had to sit through hours of questioning by Brenda's lawyer, who tried every tactic to make me seem like a bad mother. Aliar, someone with ulterior motives. But I had the truth on my side. And more importantly, I had ironclad documentation. Patricia also deposed Brenda and Carol, and I got to watch the recordings. Brenda was combative and defensive, contradicting herself multiple times, her story changing with each question. Carol tried to play the confused elderly mother card, claiming she didn't remember details. But Patricia systematically demolished every excuse. By the end, even their own lawyer looked uncomfortable. But they weren't going down without a fight. Unable to contact me directly due to the restraining order, they started a whisper campaign throughout our extended family and community. I was a liar, they said. I was making everything up to extort money from them. Ethan's injuries were from an accident I had caused, and then blamed on Brenda. I was mentally ill. Vindictive. Using the legal system to abuse my own family. Some people believed them. Family members I had thought were reasonable took their side. I sent me messages about family loyalty and forgiveness. Accused me of tearing everyone apart. I blocked them all. I had learned the hard way that people who wanted to believe lies would find a way to justify them. But other people saw through it. Neighbors who had witnessed Brenda's treatment of Kevin came forward with stories. Parents from Ethan's school who had seen the favoritism and exclusion offered support. Even some of Brenda and Carol's own friends quietly reached out to say they believed me, that they had seen concerning behavior over the years but hadn't known what to do about it. The trial date approached, and both sides prepared. Patricia had built an absolutely devastating case, with medical experts ready to testify about the severity and deliberate nature of Ethan's injuries, with character witnesses ready to discuss Brenda's history of jealousy and aggression, with financial records showing the lavish treatment of Kevin compared to Ethan. Brenda's lawyer tried multiple times to settle out of court, offering increasingly larger sums, if I would just drop the case and sign an NDA. But I refused every offer. This wasn't about money. This was about accountability. The trial lasted 4 days. The courtroom was open to the public, and I was aware of family members sitting in the gallery, taking sides, whispering judgments. But I kept my focus on Ethan, on making sure his voice was heard, on ensuring that what happened to him mattered in the eyes of the law. Patricia was magnificent, presenting each piece of evidence with precision, building an undeniable narrative of deliberate harm. The medical testimony was devastating. The emergency room doctor explained in clinical detail how burns like Ethan's occurred, demonstrating with exhibits that they were consistent with hot liquid being poured in a downward motion rather than splashed accidentally. She noted that Brenda had not called for help, had not offered first aid, had actively tried to downplay the severity. Another doctor, a burns specialist, testified about the long-term effects, including permanent scarring and the psychological trauma typically associated with deliberately inflicted injuries. Ethan's therapist testified about the nightmares, the anxiety, the trust issues that had developed. She explained how being attacked by a family member caused unique psychological damage, a betrayal that shattered a child's fundamental sense of safety. She read from Ethan's own words in therapy sessions, things he had said about being scared, about not understanding why his aunt hurt him, about feeling like he had done something wrong to deserve it. The courtroom was silent, and I saw several people in the gallery crying. Then came character witnesses. Ethan's teacher described him as a gentle, brilliant child who had become withdrawn and anxious after the incident. She produced examples of his artwork from before, bright and cheerful, and from after, darker and more chaotic, showing the visible impact of trauma. The neighbor testified about witnessing Brenda's volatility, her treatment of Kevin, her visible resentment toward Ethan at family gatherings. My boss testified about the harassment campaign, the attempts to get me fired, the vindictive escalation even after the restraining order. When it was time for Ethan to testify, the judge arranged for him to speak via video from a private room, sparing him from facing Brenda directly. I sat with him, holding his hand. As he answered Patricia's gentle questions, he was remarkably composed, speaking clearly about what happened, about how scared he had been, about how it still hurt sometimes. When asked if it was an accident, he looked directly at the camera and said no. He said Aunt Brenda had been angry and she did it on purpose to punish him for being good at school. The defense tried to challenge his testimony, suggesting he was too young to understand what happened, that his memory might be confused. But Ethan held firm, and the judge actually interrupted the defense lawyer to note that the child's testimony was remarkably consistent with all other evidence. The attempt to discredit an 8-year-old victim did not go over well. Brenda took the stand in her own defense, and it was a disaster. She tried to stick to her story about accidentally spilling the coffee, but under cross-examination, Patricia tore it apart. Why didn't you call for help? Why did you claim it was just coffee and not a big deal? Why did you try to stop Sarah from taking Ethan to the hospital? Why did multiple witnesses report you looked satisfied after the incident Brenda had? No good answers. She got flustered, then defensiva, then angry, and finally broke down crying and claiming everyone was against her. Carol's testimony was equally bad. She tried to minimize everything, claimed she had been in shock and didn't react appropriately, said she thought Ethan was overreacting, because that's what children do. Patricia presented the voicemails where Carol had explicitly told me not to make a big deal out of it, where she had said family business should stay private, where she had participated in the harassment campaign. Carol had no defense except to claim she was just trying to keep the family together. The jury deliberated for 7 hours. When they came back, the verdict was unanimous. Guilty on all counts. Assault, battery, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and conspiracy. The damages awarded were substantial, covering all of Ethan's medical expenses, ongoing therapy costs, pain and suffering, and punitive damages meant to punish the defendants for their egregious conduct. It was more money than I had ever imagined seeing in my life. But more importantly, it was validation, official recognition that what happened to my son was wrong, that the people who hurt him would face consequences. The aftermath was swift and brutal for Brenda and Carol. Brenda lost her volunteer positions at Kevin's school, was ostracized from her social circles, and faced mounting legal bills that strained her marriage to the breaking point. Derek, who had been largely absent from the drama, started looking at his wife like he didn't know her. Realizing she was capable of harming a child, the judgment meant they had to sell their house to pay the damages, downsize dramatically, and Brenda's perfect Instagram life crumbled publicly. Kevin suffered collateral damage. Targeted by bullies who called his mother a child abuser, isolated from friends whose parents didn't want their kids around his family. He felt bad for him, because none of this was his fault. But I couldn't sacrifice Ethan to protect him. Brenda had created this situation, and her son was paying for her sins. Carol lost her church community when details of the trial became known. People who had respected her for years recoiled from the woman who had watched her grandson be burned and done nothing. She was forced into retirement from her job due to the stress and scandal, and many of her friends quietly distanced themselves. The life she had built on being seen as a good Christian woman collapsed when people saw what kind of mother and grandmother she actually was. The extended family fractured completely. Some members sided with Brenda and Carol, choosing to believe their lies over documented evidence. Those people revealed themselves as enablers and flying monkeys. People willing to defend child abuse for the sake of appearances. I cut them all off without regret. Others reached out to apologize, saying they hadn't realized how bad things were, offering support too late to be meaningful. I accepted their apologies but kept them at arm's length. Trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild. And then, about 8 months after the trial ended, they came to my apartment. I saw them through the peephole. Brenda and Carol standing on my doorstep, and I almost didn't open the door. They were violating the restraining order just by being there. I could have called the police, had them arrested immediately. Part of me wanted to, but another part of me wanted to face them one more time. Wanted to look them in the eye and let them see what they had lost. I opened the door but didn't invite them in. I stood in the doorway, my body blocking their view of my home, my sanctuary, and I waited. They looked terrible. Brenda had aged years and months, her face lined and tired, her clothes cheaper and less carefully chosen. Carol looked smaller, diminished, her usual imperious demeanor replaced with something that might have been desperation or regret. Hard to tell. Brenda spoke first, her voice lacking its usual sharp edge. She said they needed my help, that things had been difficult since the trial, that she couldn't find work, that they were drowning in debt and legal fees, that their lives had fallen apart. She didn't apologize, didn't admit wrongdoing, just launched into an explanation of their financial struggles and hinted that since I had all that money from the judgment, surely I could spare some to help family get back on their feet. I almost laughed. They had burned my son, tried to destroy my reputation, fought me every step of the way in court, And now they wanted me to give them money. The audacity was breathtaking. Carol joined in, using a wheedling tone I had heard 1,000 times before. She talked about forgiveness, about being the bigger person, about how family was supposed to take care of each other. She reminded me of all the times she had helped me when I was young and struggling, as if letting me stay in her house while I paid rent and did all her housework was some grand favor I needed to repay. I let them finish, let them make their entire case, lay out all their justifications and manipulations and guilt trips. And then I spoke. My voice was calm, steady, nothing like the desperate pleading tone I had once used with them. I told them I remembered exactly what kind of help they had given me. I remembered being made to feel worthless, being told my son was a burden, being blamed for being a victim of their favoritism and abuse. I remembered how they had treated Ethan like he was less than human, how they had resented his every success and celebrated his every struggle. I told them I remembered the feeling of my son's burned skin under my hands, his screams, his terror. I remembered their faces in that moment, the satisfaction on Brenda's face and the indifference on Carol's. I told them that those memories had taught me the most important lesson of my life, that some people are incapable of love, and spending your life trying to earn something they cannot give is a waste of the precious time you have. I told them they had taught me what not to be, how not to treat my child, what a real family isn't. And for those lessons, I was grateful, because they had made me strong enough to cut out the poison and build something healthy. But I owed them nothing. Not money, not forgiveness, not even basic courtesy. They had made their choices, and now they got to live with the consequences. Brenda's face crumpled, and she started crying, ugly, desperate sobs that might have moved me if I didn't know they were just another manipulation tactic. She begged, actually begged, saying she was sorry, that she had made a mistake, that she had been under so much stress and hadn't been thinking clearly. Carol tried to invoke God, telling me that I was being cruel and unchristian, that I would be judged for my hardness of heart. I looked at both of them and felt absolutely nothing but a distant, detached pity. I told them I hoped they figured out how to survive. But it wouldn't involve me. I told them the restraining order was permanent and I would be calling the police about this violation the moment I closed the door. I told them to lose my address and never come back. Then I stepped back and closed the door in their faces, locking it behind me, and watched through the peephole as they stood there for a long moment before finally, slowly, walking away. I picked up my phone and called the police, filing a report about the restraining order violation. One more piece of documentation, one more consequence for their actions. Ethan was in his room the entire time, door closed, headphones on, focused on a painting he was working on. He didn't know they had come, didn't know what had transpired. I had protected him from that encounter just like I should have been protecting him all along. When I checked on him later, he showed me his painting. A landscape full of bright colors and hope, trees reaching toward the sun, flowers blooming in impossible profusion. It was beautiful. And more than that, it was joyful. He was healing, creating, building a life untainted by their toxicity. Over the next year, Ethan continued to flourish. The nightmares faded to occasional bad dreams. His anxiety eased as he realized we were truly safe, that the people who hurt him could never reach us again. He excelled in school, making the honor roll every semester, winning art competitions and academic awards. But more importantly, he was happy, genuinely, deeply happy, in a way that had nothing to do with achievements and everything to do with feeling secure and loved. I finished my degree in social work, graduating with honors while working full-time and raising my son. The education gave me a new career path helping other families escape toxic situations, using my own experience to guide others through the legal and emotional maze of breaking free. It was fulfilling work, turning my pain into purpose, and my trauma into tools to help others heal. We moved to a bigger apartment in a better neighborhood. Nothing fancy but a genuine home we could both be proud of. Ethan had his own room, painted in colors he chose himself. One wall dedicated to displaying his artwork. We established new traditions, just the two of us, building the kind of family we wanted instead of enduring the one we had been born into. Sunday pancakes with chocolate chips. Friday movie nights with homemade popcorn. Summer trips to the lake, where we would spend entire days reading and swimming and being peaceful together. The money from the judgment was carefully managed, invested for Ethan's future education and our long-term security. I didn't spend it frivolously or use it to show off. It was justice converted into opportunities. A way to ensure that Brenda's cruelty wouldn't define our financial future, the way it had tried to define our emotional one. Ethan would go to college without worrying about loans. He would have a foundation to build on. He would have choices. We built a chosen family too. People who earned their place in our lives through genuine care and respect. Mrs. Chen from our old building stayed in touch, adopting the role of honorary grandmother with grace and kindness. Ethan's teacher became a mentor and friend. My boss and coworkers rallied around us, proving that workplace relationships could become real community. We found belonging not through blood, but through reciprocal love and support. 18 months after the trial, Ethan's school art teacher approached me about a community exhibition with the theme of resilience and healing. She thought Ethan would be perfect for it, if he was interested. When I mentioned it to him, his face lit up with excitement. He had been working on a special piece. He said, something important. He wanted to show it. The painting he created took my breath away. It showed a small tree, its trunk scarred and partially burned, but very much alive. From the damaged bark, new branches reached toward a brilliant sun, covered in leaves of gold and green and colors that had no name in nature. At the base of the tree, flowers bloomed in impossible profusion, growing from cracked earth, their roots visible underneath. Strong and deep and unshakable, it was survival visualized. Trauma transformed into beauty, pain becoming strength. The night of the exhibition, I stood next to my son as dozens of people admired his work. He fielded questions with growing confidence. No longer the shy, frightened child who had once apologized for being smart, he explained his technique, his vision, his message about how beautiful things could grow from damaged places. A reporter from the local newspaper asked to interview him and photograph him beside his painting. And Ethan smiled, that huge, genuine smile that I had fought so hard to protect, watching him in that moment. Surrounded by people who celebrated his talent instead of resenting it. People who appreciated his gentle nature instead of calling it weakness. People who saw his light and wanted to help it shine brighter. I felt something I hadn't fully felt in years. Peace. Real peace. Not the anxious quiet of walking on eggshells, but the deep settled calm of knowing I had done everything right. I had chosen my child over toxic family. I had fought every battle necessary to keep him safe. I had built a life worth living instead of just surviving. The scars remained, both visible and invisible. Ethan would always carry the marks of what Brenda did to him. Raised pink lines across his chest that no surgery could completely erase. Both of us carried emotional scars. Triggers that would probably never completely go away. But scars are proof of survival. Scars are evidence that something tried to destroy you and failed. Scars are a map of where you've been and how far you've traveled to get somewhere better. Those scars didn't define us anymore. Our resilience defined us. Our love defined us. Our choice to break free and build something beautiful from the broken pieces defined us. We were proof that you could survive family trauma. You could set boundaries. You could walk away from blood relatives and build a family that actually deserved you. You could heal. Even when the wounds went deep. Even when the damage came from people who were supposed to protect you. Standing in that community center, bathed in warm light, my son's hand in mine, I thought about the woman I used to be. The scared 19-year-old who thought she had to accept crumbs because she didn't deserve a full meal. The exhausted single mother who bent herself into pretzels trying to earn love from people who had none to give. The desperate people-pleaser who apologized for her son being brilliant because his light made others feel dim. That woman felt like a stranger now. Someone I used to know but had outgrown. I had learned that walking away from toxicity isn't selfish. It's survival. I had learned that protecting your children means protecting them from everyone. Even blood relatives who share your DNA but not your values. I had learned that forgiveness isn't required for healing. That you can process trauma and move forward without ever letting the people who hurt you back into your life. I had learned that the word family should be earned through love and respect and reciprocal care, not wielded as a weapon to demand tolerance for abuse. Most importantly, I had learned that you teach people how to treat you. For too long, I had taught my family that they could treat us with contempt while expecting gratitude. Breaking that pattern required more strength than maintaining it ever did. It required me to believe that Ethan and I deserved better, that our peace mattered more than keeping up appearances, that my son's safety was more important than my mother's approval or my sister's ego. That belief saved our lives. Not in the dramatic Hollywood sense of preventing literal death. Though, given Brenda's escalating violence and complete lack of remorse, who knows where things might have led if I hadn't stopped her. But it saved us from something arguably worse, the slow erosion of self-worth that comes from accepting cruelty as the price of belonging. It saved Ethan from growing up believing he had to dim his light to make others comfortable, from learning that love meant sacrificing yourself on someone else's altar. It saved me from spending my entire life as a doormat for people who would never appreciate what I sacrificed and would only demand more. Today, Ethan is thriving in ways that sometimes still surprise me, even though they shouldn't. He's confident but not arrogant, kind but not a pushover, brilliant but humble about it. He has friends who genuinely care about him. He has teachers who see his potential and nurture it. He has dreams about his future, plans for college and career, and all the possibilities ahead of him. Most importantly, he has a foundation of unconditional love and unwavering support that allows him to take risks and make mistakes and grow into whoever he wants to become. And I'm thriving too, in ways I never imagined possible when I was young and trapped and convinced I would be struggling forever. I have a career I'm proud of, helping other families find their way out of toxic situations. I have genuine friendships built on mutual respect. I have financial stability, not wealth, but enough to not lie awake at night, terrified of one unexpected expense derailing everything. I have peace, real peace. The kind that comes from knowing you made the hard choices, and they were the right ones. We still have hard days. Days when Ethan has nightmares about the burns, when he freezes at the sight of coffee, when he asks questions about why people who are supposed to love you sometimes hurt you the most. Days when I doubt myself. I wonder if I should have tried harder to make it work. Feel guilty for the family. Kevin lost because of his mother's actions. Days when the weight of everything we went through feels heavy and overwhelming. But we face those days together, armed with therapy and coping strategies and the unshakable knowledge that we are stronger than what tried to break us. We talk about the hard things instead of pretending they don't exist. We cry when we need to and laugh when we can and hold each other when words aren't enough. We are proof that families broken by toxicity can heal by choosing each other. Again and again. Every single day. If there's one message I want you to take from our story, it's this. You are not required to maintain relationships that harm you, no matter who those people are. Biology is not destiny. DNA is not an excuse for abuse. Sharing blood doesn't give someone the right to drain yours. Just because someone is related to you doesn't mean they have earned a place in your life. Your heart. Your future. And if you're in that place, I was. Trapped between love and abuse. Sacrificing yourself to keep the peace. Walking on eggshells. To avoid setting off someone's jealousy or rage or unreasonable demands. Please hear me when I say you deserve better. Your children deserve better. Better exists. But you have to be brave enough to reach for it. Choosing yourself over toxic family isn't cruel. It's self-preservation. Setting boundaries isn't divisive. It's healthy. Walking away isn't giving up. It's giving yourself the chance to build something better. And sometimes the family you create is so much more real and loving and supportive than the family you were born into. Sometimes the people who share your values matter more than the people who share your blood. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply say no more. I'm done. I deserve better. And mean it with your whole heart. So I'm asking you now, have you ever had to make the choice between keeping the peace and protecting yourself or someone you love? Have you ever had to walk away from family because staying was slowly killing you? Have you ever found yourself making excuses for inexcusable behavior because they're family, and family is supposed to forgive? Drop your story in the comments below because your voice matters. Your experience is valid. Your pain is real. And someone out there needs to hear your truth to find the courage to speak their own. If this story resonated with you, if it gave you hope or validation or permission to protect yourself, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who's struggling with toxic family dynamics and wondering if escape is even possible. Together, we can break the silence around family abuse and remind each other that choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's survival. That you're not alone in this fight. That healing is possible. That better truly does exist on the other side of that terrifying decision to walk away. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for bearing witness to our pain and our healing. And most of all, thank you for being part of a community that refuses to accept abuse as the price of family love. You matter. Your boundaries matter. Your peace matters. And you deserve a life free from people who hurt you in the name of love. Never forget that.